Ever since I was a little kid, Sonic the Hedgehog has been a huge part of my life. But unlike the average fan, my introduction was not through the video games, but through reruns of the Saturday morning geek cartoon, otherwise known as SatAM. I was just a preschooler then, and my mom felt the show was too scary, but as I got older and familiarized myself with the series, that version of Sonic always came back to me. Even when I'd play the Genesis games, I'd rent VHS copies of SatAM episodes from my local Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and obsess over them. I was so in love with the world, the characters, and especially its version of Sonic, who was fun, energetic, and to my tiny elementary school brain, way past cool. And since we couldn't afford new consoles often, my definition of Sonic as a character remained shaped by those VHS episodes even as the series ventured into 3D and Robotnik became Eggman, as he'd always been in Japan. Yet when I got old enough to interact on forums, I found myself an outcast, as many fans simply did not like the SatAM version of Sonic as a character. Some felt the show didn't even need him and could have had any other mascot character in his place. Others felt like he was an insult to Sonic, too brash, too cocky, too annoying, and too dumb. While I've since come to appreciate the game canon for what it is, the SatAM version of Sonic is still the nearest and dearest to my heart. For years, I've wanted to make a proper analysis of his character, as I feel there's so much more to him that the detractors simply do not see. I even rewatched the entire series and took vigorous notes on Sonic's portrayal, just to make sure I wasn't just looking through nostalgia glasses. In the end, I came out with an even greater appreciation for the SatAM version of the character. So, dear viewers, let me take you on a journey to Planet Mobius as we explore the character who inspired me to create.
Yo, anyone ever tell you guys that you're ugly and you dress funny? Let me be the first. You're ugly and you dress funny.
It's right there in the theme song.
Sonic, he can really move. Sonic, he's got an attitude.
And yeah, attitude was one of the biggest defining characteristics of Sonic's Western marketing in the 90s. To some people, that's grating, but you have to look at the time the show came out. SatAM was released in 1993 and entered production before Sonic 2. It was in development for a while, and at a time when Sega of America had a very different vision for the character from Sega of Japan. So what we get is a Sonic who's cocky, snarky, and makes a lot of really cheesy quips and catchphrases.
Hold on, we're gonna juice. Juice and jam time. Snooze you lose, gotta cruise. That is not a dream. That is one hedgehog hunk.
Juice and jam, a lot of mondos, past cools, and he tends to say the ol a lot, and makes many references to being a hedgehog. He certainly does show some vanity, and I think for a lot of people, these traits overshadow the rest of his character. They see the talkative, quipping, goofy version of Sonic who taunts his enemies like Spider-Man, rushes headfirst into danger, and can be a little shit, mostly to Antoine and his enemies, and they think that's too harsh for Sonic, or it's too annoying, which, fair enough. This is all down to subjectivity in some regards. But then, is this really any different from Sonic of the games?
Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies? I'm out of here. I like running better.
Well, this is new. Showing remorse, Eggman? If you played nice, I wouldn't have to break all your toys.
The sword has a mind of its own. It selects its bearer.
Yeah, well, it's got a pretty smart mouth on it for a sword.
The main difference, I think, is that SatAM Sonic is extremely 90s, and so the attitude and banter he displays feels more jarring to younger audiences or to people who simply don't vibe with a little extra cheese. But I'd argue that in many respects, SatAM's Sonic core character is very, very true to Sonic as a whole, when taken from a broader perspective. Because how do we define Sonic? He's a free spirit. So is SatAM's Sonic, even if he lives in Knothole and leads a team. Freedom is his driving motivation, and he still often finds himself wandering Mobius, especially in Season 2. He has a deep love and respect for the natural world, despises tyranny, and though he can be brash and cocky, will always lend a helping hand to those in need. Yes, this is a Sonic who cries, and yes, this is a Sonic who is in love with Sally, and while he's more openly vulnerable than his game counterpart, I think it makes a ton of sense given this is a Sonic who hasn't saved the world multiple times and taken on gods and genies and all manners of fantastical foes. All this to say, Sonic's attitude here isn't too dissimilar from his other iterations. It's just with a different coat of paint from a different time.
But how do I get your computer without my speed?
Brains you have. Brains you must use.
A lot of people chalk up SatAM Sonic to being an idiot, and this is reinforced by Sally frequently questioning his intelligence, albeit playfully a lot of the time. On a surface level, he can be very impulsive, doesn't always pick up on big words, and is more of an actor than a heavy thinker, but SatAM Sonic is actually rather smart. He's shown to be quite adept at giving orders throughout Season 1, is very adaptable in his harsh environment, using his surroundings to get around traps and enemy robots, and comes up with many on-the-fly strategies when facing his foes. He actually has a very keen eye for observations, often scanning his surroundings and looking for weaknesses to exploit. He's also shown to have a skeptical side, most prominently in Season 1, such as when he doubts the Freedom Stormer's stability as a flying vessel and follows the gang on foot, even saving the Freedom Fighters from a crash. Another example is Warp Sonic, where Sonic picks up that Griff had stolen the Power Stone and rushes down to confront him. He does save Griff from the Ratbots and even shares half the Power Stone with the lower Mobians, but this is a Sonic who isn't afraid to chew people out when they take things too far. In Sonic Racer, he tries to use the race as a diversion for the Freedom Fighters to shut down the generator. While his ego's in full effect, it does show that he's able to see that it's a trap, but wants to participate anyway. And when he has to bail on the race, he uses his power rings to melt down the generator and save Antoine, and ultimately favors the victory for Mobius over his own pride. Harmonic Sonic is one of Season 1's best demonstrations of Sonic's intelligence. He devises the plan to use the rocket to reach Robotnik's Sky Spy satellite. He and Rotor make the plan to use energy gathered from Sonic's speed to shoot down the stealth bot approaching Knothole. Sonic also crafts a disguise to trick the robots at the bar into giving answers to where the spy sensors are, so they can shut the thing down. While his cover gets blown, he does find the answers necessary for him and Rotor to finish the job. Sonic's nightmare deserves a special mention here, because the episode deals with Sonic's insecurities and greatest fears. I'll touch on this more a bit later, but throughout the nightmare, Sally asks,
Sonic, where were you when the brains were handed out?
Huh?
Many times during SatAM's run, Sally questions Sonic's intelligence. This episode shows that he actually internalizes those words, and while he may ask it with cockiness, deep down they cut pretty deep. He even has a panic attack late into the episode due to this and other traumas. When he finally breaks free, he devises a plan to dig underground and use the sewage gunk to thwart Robotnik's plan to smother Mobius in acid rain. Season 2 seems to be a point of contention with Sonic's overall characterization, specifically his intelligence. I think the episode Game Guy is rather emblematic of this supposed shift, as from the very start of the episode, we see some rather odd behaviors compared to Season 1. Sonic mistakes a large magnet for a toaster. He's shown to be a lot more reckless, trying to operate machinery he doesn't fully understand, whereas in Season 1 he showed much more caution with unknown surroundings, and usually tested them by throwing rocks or other debris to see how they work. The episode makes a point that Sonic is too quick to trust Ari, while having Sally be the voice of reason, but this is really odd when juxtaposed with Warp Sonic, where the roles are reversed. Sally is the one smitten by Griff's manipulative advances, whereas Sonic, despite his jealousy, is correct in his observations that Griff stole the Power Stone. Not only that, but Sonic seems even more dumbed down at the pyramid, where Ari is the one who has to show him that the door is rigged, and Sonic strangely doesn't even know what unscramble means, comparing it to eggs. Granted, there are some silly moments in Season 1, such as this.
Not what? Who?
Who is what?
And it's also possible that some of these remarks, like the toaster thing, are just sarcasm. Still, it's just really strange when you go from Season 1, which is more consistent with Sonic's street smarts and environmental awareness, to this episode, where he holds the idiot ball for most of it, and the moral seems to be not to leap before looking. Yet thankfully, Season 2 does recover as it goes along, and we see some genuinely great moments with Sonic's smarts in full effect. I think the highlight for me is the episode Droodhenge, where Sonic's the one who comes up with the loophole for Nicole's age-locking by pointing out that if Robotnik's Doomsday Project succeeds, Sally won't even live to come of age. There are other great moments, however, like in Sonic Inversion, when he remembers what Uncle Chuck said about roboticized Mobians being fully aware despite their lack of control, and coaxes his uncle to fight for said control. Earlier in the episode, he also fakes surrender so he can get close enough to steal the necessary chips for the deroboticizer. In No Brainer, though he spends most of the episode brainwashed, near the end he uses the memory scrambler to give Snively a taste of his own medicine, and tricks him into believing Robotnik is a bottom-dwelling scumsucker. Earlier in the episode, he also remembers a tricky password and uses that to get in and try and save some freedom fighters from roboticization. Blast from the past has a few noteworthy moments that feel in line with Season 1, such as when he picks up on the booby traps on the floating island and intentionally takes a fall with Sally, knowing Dulcie will come save them. He does have that 32 chili dog moment that screws up their time travel destination, but Season 2 in general seems to amp up his love of chili dogs far more than in Season 1. In Part 2, he's the one who comes up with using his anti-grav sneakers as a cushion for the landing when he and Sal take on Robotnik's planet-destroying ship. The further I went into Season 2, the more I realized that he isn't that flanderized. Even the Antoine shorts offer some insightful details, like Sonic being a skilled tracker who's teaching Tails the ropes, or how in Odd Couple, he mentions that he'll have to rebuild his own house, showing that Sonic has skills with building and carpentry. In Cry of the Wolf, he comes up with a plan to use a power ring to deal with the Doomsday Pod, and throughout many episodes, he uses tricks like whipping up whirlwinds to devastate robotic foes and digging and tunneling to get past tough obstacles. Basically, when it comes to the SatAM version of Sonic, he actually is pretty intelligent. Yes, he doesn't always understand complex language, as seen with Nicole and his demands for her to, quote, speak English, and he's very impulsive and kind of a dork, but if nothing else, he's competent, adaptable, and a surprisingly skilled leader when episodes like Game Guy don't dumb down his intelligence to impart a lesson.
Very cool, Booker.
No big deal.
Come on, man. You're totally hot with the old hammer.
Yeah, but who cares about some nerdy handyman?
I've seen it argued that SatAM's Sonic is just an egotistical jerk with a big head who doesn't appreciate his friends and... no? As early as the pilot, you see Sonic's care and compassion, with how at first he's afraid to let Tails go with him to Robotropolis due to the dangers, but ultimately relenting and bringing him along for the ride. Or the way he tenderly describes how much he misses his Uncle Chuck and Mutsky. When he's unable to fully break Mutsky from Robotnik's control, he's sad, but he swears he'll come back one day. Though Mutsky's canon status is debatable, seeing how he didn't appear in Blast to the Past. Still, this pattern continues throughout the series. One big trait that stood out to me on rewatch was how Sonic refuses to leave anyone behind. When you consider that he lost his family and home as a 5-year-old kid, it really starts to click. This is a Sonic who has never truly won. So in episodes like Sonic Boom or Sonic Racer, when a pal is in danger, he's quick to rush back for their own safety, even if it means abandoning one other goal. Boom especially sticks out in this regard, because when he goes to rescue Cat urges him to find Sally and Antoine because Robotnik's onto them. Even so, Sonic's left extremely conflicted, and when everything's squared away with Sally and Ant, he tries to save Cat, but it's simply too late. Even so, he tries his best to avenge Cat near the end of the episode. Ultrasonic and the subsequent Uncle Chuck episodes really feed into this too, with Sonic's eagerness to take his uncle home, even after the power ring wears off and he's back to a loyal servant. Time and time again, Sonic tries to get his uncle to stay, and time again, Chuck remains in Robotropolis. No doubt this deeply tugs at Sonic's heartstrings, because he's missed his uncle ever since he was a little kid and just wants his family back. But it's not just Cat or Uncle Chuck. In Sonic and Sally, when Sally fails to make it home, he's raring to go grab her, and his friends have to restrain him until he gets a power ring. Despite the Flanderization in Game Guy, Sonic's desire to save other freedom fighters makes perfect sense with his character and a desire to not let anyone else get roboticized. And when Ari's falling into the void, Sonic is desperate to save him, even after Ari backstabbed him under Robotnik's command. And in Blast of the Past, Part 1, his inability to save the two nameless freedom fighters is the start of what kickstarts his desire to go back in time. Sonic in SatAM has a huge heart and a surprising sense of humility too. One example I always go back to is in Sonic and Sally, when Bunny saves him from the Megamuck. Rather than make it about himself, he thanks Bunny twice and is very supportive of her. That supportive side shows in many other instances, too, such as the way he hypes Rotor up in Harmonic Sonic and Subsonic, despite the Walrus's low self-esteem. Or the way he sticks up for Tails and Droodhenge when Sally thinks he's too young to go on missions with them. The SatAM Sonic may boast about his own skills and speed, but he's just as quick to praise his pals when they succeed and lift them up when they're feeling down. We see a lot of this in Season 2, such as the way he physically and verbally comforts Sal when she's anxious about seeing her father again, or how he reminds her at the end of the Void that even if they couldn't bring her father back, they still made a huge step forward with the Freedom Fighters list. Sonic Past Cool has some sweet moments like this too, such as the way he comforts Tails about Baby T, pointing out how the little guy can't stay because he'd miss his mom, or the way he shows concern for the safety of the dinosaurs due to the jungle's uncharted status. He's also appreciative when Mama T saves him and even kisses her on the nose. He's willing to forgive people who wronged him, such as Griff, and understanding that he only took the Power Stone due to a desperation to keep his home afloat. This is a Sonic who can compromise, and who sees the hardships faced by victims such as the Kraken in Subsonic, and is always raring to dive in and do something about it. He's even willing to go to bat for people he dislikes, like Antoine. Yes, he picks on and teases Antoine a bit, gets pissed when he acts foolish or obnoxious, but this is hardly a trait exclusive to Sonic. The way Antoine is written, he's kind of just the butt monkey in the team, and Season 2 makes it even more apparent. Even so, in Hooked In on Sonics, he's still willing to save Antoine in the end, and even after he stupidly took a power ring straight to Robotnik, he doesn't hold it too heavily against him, and the two even work together to stop the Shredder. In The Odd Couple, he's genuinely pretty nice to Ant, too. He cooks dinner, and even takes off his shoes after Antoine gets on his case about wearing them on the couch. Though he makes a big mess in the kitchen, he also cleans it up. The episode isn't the greatest, but it is one of the few times where Sonic is generally more cordial with Antoine, when in other circumstances they're butting heads. With Antoine constantly being antagonistic to Sonic, it's really no surprise he'd act so harsh in other circumstances. Really, I think the people who see SatAM's Sonic as too mean or self-absorbed probably haven't watched more than 1 or 2 episodes, or are just so put off by his outward demeanor that they didn't see past the surface, because he's genuinely a really sweet guy who loves to uplift others just as much as he toots his own horn, and is always there to praise his team when they do a good job.
Sal.
I think one of the most crucial things to understand about SatAM's Sonic is that he has trauma and heaps of it. I touched on this a few times already, but Blast to the Past really recontextualizes everything. Sonic was a 5-year-old kid when his peaceful world fell apart. Robotnik staged a coup, and in one day, he and his friends were forced to flee to Knothole Village, leaving his beloved uncle behind. Sonic had super speed, but it wasn't enough. He had to watch the planet shrivel and die, forced to hide in the shadows. It took 10 years for him to reunite with his Uncle Chuck, and that first reunion ended in another goodbye. Over that time, the Freedom Fighters had to scrounge for scraps in Robotropolis in order to get by. They had small victories over Robotnik, but could never topple his throne. Many Freedom Fighters, like Cat and the unnamed Mobians in Blast to the Past Part 1, were roboticized anyway. Not only did Sonic lose his family, but so did all of his friends. Every day was a fight for survival, and even his speed isn't an instant fix for the sweeping damage all over Planet Mobius. In short, I think that part of why Sonic is so impulsive is because if he stops and thinks too much, he'll be hit with these harsh facts. It's easier to be fast, flighty, cocky, and cool, so he can be a symbol of hope for his friends and teammates. I think he's very much aware of how much his speed matters, because when Lazar removes it from him in Super Sonic, he questions what he's supposed to do without it. Similarly, in Hooked on Sonics, he's forced to rely on walking thanks to Robotnik's weaponry tracking when he runs fast. This really shows how much he relies on his speed, as he's so frustrated and uneasy when that's removed from the equation. He adapts because he's always had to adapt, but when you're born with a gift that makes you faster than sound, I genuinely think there'd be this rift between him and the others. Because his natural inclination for speed puts him so far ahead of the rest. And then there's the fact that Sally likes to poke and prod at him about not using his head. A lot of the time, it's just banter between the two, and they tease each other back, but do fundamentally love each other all the same. That's made especially clear in Season 2, where Sonic and Sally are much more openly affectionate with each other. But even people who love each other can unintentionally hurt one another. As mentioned, Sonic's nightmare shows the culmination of all those times Sally has questioned his intelligence, along with a deep fear that she'll one day be roboticized. Not only does he have nightmares about this, but he has a full-blown panic attack and is only broken from it when the real Sally, along with Bunny and Antoine, voice their support and comfort him through his pain. And when you combine this fact with the fact that he cries in both Ultrasonic and Sonic Conversion after parting ways with Uncle Chuck, and you can see the regret and guilt that eats away at him. And it's not just with Uncle Chuck, but with Cat, those nameless Freedom Fighters, and the whole coup that makes him wish he could have stopped Robotnik 10 years ago. SatAM's Sonic would see his game counterpart, and I think he'd be jealous, because while Game Sonic has faced challenges, he's always come out on top. Even Sonic Forces ultimately ended with the dismantling of Eggman's empire, and that didn't take over a decade to accomplish. And yeah, some might find it frustrating that this is a Sonic who is so traumatized, who sometimes has to rely on his team rather than simply relying on himself, but I think that really humanizes him. It gives him so much depth and makes him one of the most fleshed out versions of the character to me.
No way, Sal.
We are in this together, Sonic Hedgehog. However it ends.
Whoa.
Check.
Check. Hold on. We're going down.
Before we wrap things up, I do think it's important to touch on Sonic's relationship with Sally. It's a point of contention for a lot of people, whether it's because they don't like the idea of Sonic being in a romantic relationship or because they don't think Sally is good for him. And yeah, I can see why to a certain extent. They butt heads fairly often, with Sally calling out his impulsiveness and the aforementioned times he doesn't use his head. But that's not all they have. Sally does congratulate Sonic when he succeeds, is thankful when he saves her, and encourages him whenever he's truly feeling down. They push and tease each other, sure, but that's normal teenage behavior. Even friends do that every now and then. So sure, he'll boast about being a hedgehog hunk, and she'll roll her eyes, but she'll also be the first to come up to bat for him when he's in the middle of a panic attack, or talk him through his grief with Uncle Chuck. At the end of Blast to the Past, she reminds him that their plan wasn't a complete failure, rather than complaining about how he screwed up their destination. She reminds him that even though Uncle Chuck had to return to Robotropolis, he's himself again, and there's still hope. In turn, Sonic supports her through her grief with her father, lifts her up when she's feeling blue, and I think sometimes his silly quips are for her benefit too, to help her laugh and lighten up. I do think he's kind of selfish about her in Warp Sonic, where he makes a self-congratulatory poem to win her affection and calls her his girl, but that part of the episode just felt engineered to have a conflict when there was already a good one in place without the love drama. And in other episodes, Sonic doesn't act nearly as entitled to Sally's affection. That's purely Antoine. And the two are shown to be very playfully competitive anyway, like when they have a kissing contest in Hooked on Sonics. I think because a lot of people relate SatAM to Archie Sonic, they conflate the two Sallys, but her SatAM counterpart is actually a rather free-spirited and doesn't think her title as a princess holds any meaning in a world ruled by Robotnik. She's always right there, ready to take action alongside Sonic, and at the end of the Doomsday Project, wants to be right there with him, no matter how it ends. In short, I think it's a relationship that works well for this version of Sonic. Childhood friends who lost everything, who lead a team of freedom fighters to win it all back, whose personalities contrast and complement each other. Sally's the calculated brains, Sonic's the fun-loving and quick-footed speedster who keeps everyone's hopes alive. She's willing to call him out when he gets ahead of himself, but generally still respects Sonic and sees the good he brings and recognizes just how important he is, not only to Mobius, but to her.
No more Robotnik. Too bad.
What? Too bad?
Hey, without a villain, what are heroes gonna do?
There's a lot to be said about SatAM and whether or not it's a faithful version of Sonic, but I think the modern discourse surrounding it involves a lot of bad faith discussion and a refusal to appreciate the show for what it is or the context in which it was made. That goes doubly for its version of Sonic, but I hope that by watching this video you've gained a new appreciation for this character, as he's been very near and dear to my heart. You can actually find the entire series on YouTube for free if you want to check it out for yourself and form your own opinions. I'll leave a linked card up top and link it in the description as well, but please feel free to share your comments and thoughts on his character. I'd also like to take a moment to shout out the Season 3 fan project, which is both an awesome webcomic continuation of the show, but also a work-in-progress fan pilot with amazing love put into it. I'll be sure to link them in the description too. Please do let me know if you'd like to see me discuss more about Sonic as a whole, or even more SatAM videos, like an episode ranking, since I did rewatch the series in preparation for this video. Since my non-Undertale videos tend to perform poorly, please do consider sharing this around, liking, commenting, and anything you can do to boost it in the algorithm. Likewise, I have a Patreon, where you can pledge directly and get early access to various things, from scripts, concept art, to patron polls, and more. Thanks so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.